What is going on, Raider Nation? It's your boy Sanjit back at it with another video. Today we are talking about a ton of news that is coming out of the NFL. There's things related to the Raiders. There's things not related to the Raiders. There's things that could impact the Raiders, and I have some thoughts and opinions on all of it. And we're going to get into it today. Vincent Monsignor, who is a legit insider for the Las Vegas Raiders, this is the guy that the Raiders go to whenever they need to put out some information, has officially put it out there that the Raiders are shopping tight end Michael Mayer. Vincent Monsignor has put it out there. He said, I've been told multiple teams have been doing due diligence on the Raiders tight end Michael Mayer. Multiple sources indicate the Raiders are trying to trade Mayer, who is headed into his third season. Plenty of teams are interested in quotations. Michael Mayer is officially being shopped by the Las Vegas Raiders, and we reported this last week because we had heard a rumor last week as well. I think it was the Athletic guys that reported it then. Vincent's obviously a much better source. And when Vincent Monsignor says something, chances are it is true. And with the Raiders shopping Michael Mayer, that tells me John Spytek has come into the building. He's looked at what we kind of have. He's spoken to Chip Kelly, and Chip Kelly's told him kind of his thoughts and opinions. And they feel that Michael Mayer has more value for maybe another team as he will for the Raiders. What this tells me right here is that Chip Kelly does not, he doesn't plan to run two tight ends a whole lot. Chip Kelly feels that his offense is most likely going to work best with Brock Bowers as the official true tight end. And then they'll have some receivers out there, right? They'll go 3 wide, 4, maybe even 5 wide receivers. Who knows? But to me, Chip Kelly obviously feels a certain type of way. And I think based off of how he's kind of run his offenses in the past, something tells me Michael Mayer just wouldn't have the value for the Raiders if he continues to stay here. I remember when Josh McDaniels and Dave Ziegler traded up to take Michael Mayer. They had felt they got the best tight end coming out of the draft that year. They felt they had gotten a steal. They traded up to get Michael Mayer, and he was the third tight end taken in that class, and it really hasn't worked out for the Raiders. His first year, Michael Mayer was really, really bad in my opinion. Again, tight ends sometimes take time to develop. And then in his second year, he missed first half of the season, but he looked okay when he did play. But the guy definitely is not what we thought he was, right? When I watched Michael Mayer at Notre Dame, I think it was 2 years before he actually came out, the guy was dominant. He was one of the best tight ends. People were saying this guy could be a generational tight end coming out. And although he looked really, really good in college, it never really translated into the NFL. Even his final year at Notre Dame, he didn't look as good in my opinion. And it obviously never worked out for the Raiders, right? We're now at the point where the Raiders are looking to potentially trade him, potentially get a pick for him. I'm going to be honest with you guys. I don't know if there's a team that's going to actually give us a whole ton for Michael Mayer. I think his value is kind of low at this point. He was a high second-round pick. I think we're at the point now where, could you get a fourth-round pick for Michael Mayer? I think best case scenario is you get a fourth-round pick because this guy has not had good tape, has not had good production. He fails to kind of separate, and I think teams kind of see that. To me, if you're a team that needs a tight end, are you better off saying, hey, let's go out and get Michael Mayer, a fourth-round pick, or should we wait for the actual draft coming up and take a tight end in the fourth round? Harold Fannin Jr. out of Bowling Green looks pretty good. He might be available in the fourth round. Maybe not fourth, but he could be available, right? There's some issues with his tape. But there's other tight ends available in this class. A very, very stacked tight end class that's kind of coming out. And this class has so many players, defensive ends, offensive linemen. There's so many guys across the board. There's a chance a team might say, we'll use our third or fourth round pick on a rookie where you get 4 years. Michael Mayer has 2 years remaining on that rookie contract before you have to pay him. So it's an interesting thing that's kind of coming out with Michael Mayer. I think there's a really good chance he won't be here with the Raiders as we go forward. But I guess there's also a chance no team's willing to give you up a pick. And in that instance, maybe the Raiders just kind of keep him. Right? We'll see what ends up happening. I would hope that the Raiders end up keeping Michael Mayer. I still think, even though it hasn't been great up to this point, I still think he can develop down the line and still be a good, productive football player. Will he ever be worth, the 33rd, 34th overall pick, whatever he was drafted at? I don't think he will be, right? That's a very, very high pick. Think Jackson Powers Johnson. Think about Powers Johnson relative to Michael Mayer and kind of the impacts we saw from Powers Johnson, which we haven't seen from Michael Mayer. He might not ever be worth that pick, but if he's a good run blocker, which he's kind of shown us he is, if he can be a good pass blocker and chip and do those type of things, I think he's a player to kind of keep around. Even if he plays like 15 snaps a game, I still think that's worth it. But he might not want to kind of be in that role. Another thing to note is Chip Kelly's going to utilize a lot of 5-man pass protection. So Pass blocking from your tight end is not something you're going to potentially need a whole lot, right? But we'll see what ends up happening. It is an interesting report nonetheless. But there's a lot of other things that have come out today. If you guys don't know this, free agency is like a week away. We're at the point where teams are going to start to trade some of their players. We're going to hear a lot of rumors, a lot of reports. But we're also getting a lot of things that are actually happening at this moment. Earlier today, the Bengals franchise tagged T. Higgins for the second straight year. T. Higgins is going to end up getting $26 million this year. Now, this franchise tag could mean that the Bengals look at it like, hey, we'll franchise him this year and we'll trade him at some point. If it's not within the next week, maybe within the year, we'll trade him at some point to a team that needs a wide receiver. But that caliber of wide receiver, we're not going to let him walk. Or we're not going to just let him go to a team and allow a team to have a guy like T. Higgins, right? I think T. Higgins is one of the best wide receiver ones, or I shouldn't use wide receiver ones. I think he's one of the best wide receivers in the NFL, right? It's a guy that can beat double coverage. It's a guy that can beat press coverage. It's a guy that's big, long, strong. If you single man him, he's going to make you essentially pay, right? I think he's one of the best in the NFL at that. And I think he's going to get north of $30 million. Obviously, some people wanted the Raiders to bring in T. Higgins. The Raiders do need an wide receiver, and I do think T. Higgins could be that for the Raiders. But there's also options in this draft that's kind of coming up. Marvin Harrison was a guy last year that came out, phenomenal player, true X. This year, you got a couple of guys, right? I think Tetra McMillan's probably the guy that's like that true X. Colorado has a wide receiver that could be a legit X. I forget his name. There's a couple other guys, right, that kind of play that role. It is a hard role to find, right? It's not as easy as finding like the other guy that kind of goes into motion. The guy that's like that wide receiver too. In this instance, the Raiders have Jacoby Myers as their wide receiver too. And it's interesting nonetheless, right? So T. Higgins gets franchise tag. I think there's a chance he still ends up getting traded. If I'm the Raiders, I'm not necessarily trading for him, right? Unless it's like a 5th round pick, because you still got to pay him north of $30 million, right? So to me, that just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. The Bengals, to franchise tag T. Higgins, also had to release guard Alex Kappa. And Raiders fans are going crazy over this, and it just doesn't make sense to me. We have multiple beat writers, we have multiple reporters talking about Alex Kappa like he's Jackson Powers Johnson or something, right? And I shouldn't say that. It's disrespectful to Kappa. Kappa's a pretty good offensive lineman, right? He's had a lot of success in the past. John Spytek had an issue drafting him to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. He played 4 years with the Bucks, went to the Bengals for the last 3 years, and he was pretty good, right? But he did have a fall off this past season. I think he gave up like 7-8 sacks. But Alex Kappa, he's an okay football player, right? I think he's very similar to a guy like Jordan Meredith, where these guys, if they make contact with people, can kind of hold their ground, but they're not people movers. And to me, I don't think it makes sense for the Raiders to pay Alex Kappa, $5-6 million to come in. And even if he starts, it's just not a lot of upside there. You look at an offensive line like the Panthers. If you guys remember going back before the Raiders played the Panthers, I talked about it multiple times on this channel. You guys go back and watch those recaps that I did, or I should say game previews that I did. And I said the Panthers have a phenomenal offensive line. They're bullies up front. And they went on to beat the shit out of the Raiders. Like, they bullied us, right? They ran all over us. We got literally no pressure on that offensive line. The reason why was because the Panthers had built guys that were bullies up front. Ike Ekwonu left tackle, Damian Lewis at left guard, Robert Hunt at right guard. These guys brought in bullies, and they bullied the Raiders, and they bullied a lot of teams this past season. Alex Kappa is not a bully, right? Bringing in Alex Kappa, signing Jordan Meredith and extending him, Dylan Parham, these guys aren't bullies out there. And I think for the Raiders, you got to go get some bullies. You have Jackson Powers Johnson, which is a great start. DJ Glaze, I don't think he's the long-term right tackle. I would still give him one more year to prove himself. He can go into guard. He's not necessarily a bully, but you can add one other guy at the other guard position that is a bully, right? And there's a bunch of guys in this class. Anthony Belton comes to mind. Charles Grant comes to mind. Those guys can play guard or tackle. I'd probably start them at tackle first. But you bring in guys like that, you're getting bullies up front, right? And I think for the Raiders, you got to look to build a bully up front. You can't just have holders, right? Offensive linemen that hold their position. Alex Kappa is going to make contact with Chris Jones, who's playing, maybe that 2-eye technique. And all that happens is they stop themselves, right? Chris Jones holds the gap. Alex Kappa holds the block. And the running back has to squeeze through the right side of Alex Kappa, right, to be able to kind of get through that gap. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But when Paris Johnson makes contact with Chris Jones going 2 yards that way, right? We need those type of guys, in my opinion. But some people are talking about Alex Kappa to the Raiders. I don't agree with it. And one of the big reasons why I don't agree with it is because I think this draft class has a ton of really good interior offensive linemen. Multiple guys across the board. You know, Will Campbell had his measurements. I don't think Will Campbell plays tackle at the next level. Josh Simmons had his measurements. Kind of disappointing. I still think he'll be a tackle, but there's a chance if he doesn't work out as a tackle, he also moves to guard. Donovan Jackson, although he was a long-term guard, some people thought, hey, you know, he played pretty good at left tackle for Ohio State when Josh Simmons went down. His measurements, to me, say he's a guard. Josh Connerly, maybe he's a guard as well. We have like 10 tackles. I'm going to be honest, guys. I think pretty much every tackle in this class at the top end is basically going to be a guard. I think Anthony Belton, Josh Simmons have the potential to stay at tackle. Same with Josh Connerly, but we don't really know if they're going to. Charles Grant, I think, is going to be a guard at the next level. He plays left tackle for William and Mary. There's not a lot of, you know, true tackles in this class. Armand Membao is my number one offensive tackle coming out this year. He's like 6'3.5". Right? Actually, I think he's 1/8 of an inch less than being 6'4". Actually, he might actually have measured above 6'4". Don't quote me on that. There's been some funky things happening from the Senior Bowl to the Combine, right? Everybody's taller at the Combine, but their arm length's less. I don't know what happened, but Membao, my number one offensive tackle, may actually be a guard at the next level, right? So it's going to be, you know, kind of a weird draft as we get into it because we don't really know who's going to be drafted as a tackle, which teams will value which guys as a guard as we kind of get into it. But a couple more things that I want to kind of talk about. So another guy that was released earlier today was Darius Slay. I've seen a lot of Raider fans saying, hey, should the Raiders target Darius Slay given that, you know, our secondary is, you know, is not 100% perfect this season. You know, last season we really struggled at certain times in that season. And I think a lot of people blame the secondary for why we're struggling. And I think it's important to point out, you know, last year our defense was really, really banged up. Malcolm Koonce out for the year. He was the guy we were really relying on last year. Christian Wilkins played like 5-6 games out for the year. Another guy we had invested a lot of money in. Maxx Crosby missed like the like the third of the season, right? Like take 1/3 of a season. Like the last third, he missed that. And then Jack Jones. People are like, hey, he's not a starting caliber cornerback, which I 100% disagree with. I think, you know, Patrick Graham had Jack Jones trying to jump plays, trying to bait quarterbacks. In my opinion, Jack Jones was told to do certain things, and then they were told that, hey, the safety behind you will rotate over the top. Multiple plays like that, right? And I see it on tape where Isaiah Pola-Mao is just a step slow sometimes. I see it on tape where some of the guys get confused, right? Jack Jones is in a cover 2, and the safety rotates to the other side of the field for whatever reason. To me, I think, you know, last year what we saw with the Raiders was a defense that was banged up. They're trying to do things to make up for the offense struggling as well. I think Darius Slay is a good player, but he is older at this point. I would still consider bringing him in, but I don't think the Raiders are at this point where you have to say, hey, you know, like we have no good corners. We need to revamp the entire secondary. Truth be told, you know, we've already brought back Isaiah Pola-Mao. If we bring back Trayvon Merrick, we're at a good spot. Maybe you draft the safety or you draft the corner, depending on what happens with Hobbs as well. I don't think the Raiders are that bad as a secondary. I think Jack Jones is a legit corner, right? You don't get corners with that type of ball skills. The amount of times this guy gets his hands on the ball, you don't get that type of corner generally speaking. Of course, he needs to calm down with all the touchdowns he gives up at times. But I think part of that could also be the scheme is asking him to do that. I think if they did not ask him to do that, if they had him kind of like, you know, relax a little bit, I think he'd be a good football player. In fact, I think if Jack Jones goes to the Commanders, if the Raiders were to release it for whatever reason, I think Dan Quinn would do wonders with Jack Jones, right? I think Jack Jones becomes an instant top 10 corner in the NFL with a guy like Dan Quinn. We saw Dan Quinn make Deron Bland, I think he's like a 5th-round pick, and Trayvon Diggs. We saw Dan Quinn make these guys top 5 corners, right? And both guys are struggling now with Dan Quinn ultimately gone. Cornerback is a system position, right? They say system quarterbacks. Tom Brady's a system quarterback. That's not true, but system cornerbacks is a real thing. Believe it or not. Google it, right? Look into it. Look at all the good corners. Scheme to scheme. You'll see guys dominate and then struggle. Darius Slay, I think, could be good with the Raiders. But again, I think, Ja'Cory Bennett was handpicked by Patrick Graham. We have a couple other guys we drafted this past year. Jack Jones has been solid. Nate Hobbs has been solid. If you can just retain those guys, maybe you add a guy like Malachi Starks, if he slips into the second round somehow. I think the Raiders could be in a really, really good spot to kind of go forward. I'd probably pass on Darius Slay. Osa Odigizua was another guy we had touched on in the past. This is just an update. The Raiders aren't bringing in Osa. He's way too costly for the Raiders. Some people disagreed and said, who the hell's Osa Odigizua? Why would the Raiders pay this guy? $25 million. I think at that point I had said he'll probably get like close to 20. People are like, why would the Raiders pay Osa Odigizua close to 20 million? No one knows who the hell this guy is. Osa's legit, right? And the Dallas Cowboys franchise tagged him. So he'll get about $25 million for the year under the franchise tag. I would expect the Cowboys to try to extend him long-term, and he'll probably get close to 25 on the long-term extension as well. Osa's a legit defensive tackle. He's a legit pass rusher. His best football is in front of him. I think he's like 24 years old, right? And sometimes D tackles kind of go under notice, or, they don't get the hype that some other guys may get, right? Like Kalijah Kancey, for example, is underhyped, I think. He's a top 7 D tackle, in my opinion. People don't generally agree with that. Osa's legit as well. He got that contract. And I just wanted to kind of show that to you guys since we're going over some of these updates. And then lastly is the last thing we'll talk about. Deebo Samuel was traded for a 5th round pick to the Washington Commanders. Should the Raiders have jumped all in and said, let's bring in Deebo Samuel, let's make this happen? Deebo Samuel's a good weapon, no matter how you look at it. He's not a real wide receiver. He's not a running back either. He's kind of in between. He's kind of like someone like Percy Harvin, for example, if you guys remember. Devin Hester's another guy that kind of comes to mind. Although Hester did most of his damage returning kicks and punts. These guys are weapons on offense, right? You give these guys the ball and you let them make plays, but that also comes down to you got to have a good offensive coordinator to design those plays. And I think with Deebo Samuel going to the Washington Commanders, given he's fully healthy, which he wasn't 100% healthy over the last 2 years, given he's fully healthy, I think he's a good football player. And I think for a 5th round pick, it makes sense to the Commanders. But we have to also realize that the 5th round pick is one element of it. There's also the other element, which is you got to pay him $30 million a year, right? There's 2 elements to these trades that you got to factor in. So although, yes, it's a 5th round pick that you're ultimately giving up, you're also taking in that $30 million contract. And to me, I think it's a good pickup for the Commanders, right? The Commanders are trying to go all in to win that Super Bowl. They'll have Cliff Kingsbury 1 more year before he takes a head coaching job after this year. And bringing in and just kind of adding those talented players makes sense. Plus, the Commanders' general manager is connected, right? Adam Peters was with the 49ers the year before. He's connected to the 49ers. He's connected to Deebo. So it just kind of made sense for them. I think for the Raiders, this would have been a bad trade, even if it just cost a 5th round pick. Deebo would make the Raiders better, but I think the Raiders are okay with the receivers they have. They need a true X. They need to add running backs, right? And then maybe fix that offensive line a little bit, and you can compete with that, assuming you get that quarterback as well. 4 or 5 small changes this offseason. The Raiders are legit, right? I know a lot of people will push back against that, but, 2 years ago, they were like, the Raiders defense sucks, and they made all these changes, and we're like, hey, this defense is going to be good going into the 2023 season. And they were okay for the first 5-6 weeks, but once McDaniels got fired, we had the number 1 defense in the NFL. And that was not a fluke. That defensive line was incredible. And coming into this last year, we should have had a top 5 defensive line if we're fully healthy, but we had a bunch of injuries, right? And then, of course, the offense had way too many turnovers. The Raiders, if they get a good quarterback that can protect the football, will have success this season, right? I hope you guys enjoyed this video, man. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Thumbs up, subscribe if you're not subscribed. I always appreciate all the support from you guys. We are entering that time where things are going to slow down at some point. So we'll probably talk about some random things like, news from random teams and stuff like that. So let me know what you guys think, man. Thumbs up, subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time with another video.